The PSP has been out for something like 17 years, which is crazy to say out loud, but because it's been out for so long, many of these fan game projects that would seemingly take years to complete, maybe when they were first announced or thought about in different forum posts years back, have actually had long enough to run their course and come to fruition, where these games that I'm going to show you in this video have been translated from their original Japanese releases to playable English versions that you can play on your PSP. Now, of course, you need a modded PSP, and not all the gameplay in this video will be reflective of the English versions, but it's the same general gameplay, so if you like what you see, check out these games. I will have them all listed in the order that they appear down in the description of this video, because assumably I will say some of these Japanese names wrong, and ultimately you'll just want to copy and paste out of there into Google to try and find the game for yourself in an English format. You'll be able to play this again on a modded PSP, the actual hardware, a PS Vita, and then on the PPSSPP emulator, or if you want to play it on a RetroArch, I'm sure you can do that too and up-res it a little bit. So the first one I want to cover, Monster Hunter Portable 2nd G. Now, of course, there was a variety of Monster Hunter games that came out on the PSP, including Monster Hunter 3rd, but Monster Hunter 2nd didn't come out. You may be thinking it did. You're thinking of Monster Hunter Freedom. That came out, that had a second version on the PSP, but Monster Hunter Portable 2nd G did not come out on the PSP, so there is a fan translation so that you can play that one as well if you're a big Monster Hunter fan. Otherwise, I would just start with, one of the English ones to get yourself up to speed if you've never played a Monster Hunter game before. Then Final Fantasy Type 0, which of course did release in the West as a console game for the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, but originally was a PSP title in Japan. It was actually one of the first Japanese fan translations that I checked out, just because this was such a big game, it was a big deal for the PSP. I believe this was like a 2-disc release, like there were 2 UMDs in this game, so having it be fan translated, being able to play it years ago before it came to the console versions that we got, these HD versions in the Xbox One and the PS4, was really cool. Now, I'm not going to attempt to say the title of the next game, but essentially it's Black Panther Yakuza's New Chapter, a Yakuza spin-off game. If you're familiar with the Yakuza games that were on the PlayStation platform for a long time, made their way over to Xbox now, that had 2 different spin-off games that were released on the PSP exclusively in Japan, but have been translated. And this is probably a good point for me to mention that many of these games have relatively complete fan translations. However, there will always be some screens that will pop up, that maybe weren't translated, and they'll have Japanese text. You'll kind of just have to use your best judgment. But ultimately, all the games I'm talking about here have had their main core elements translated to English. And then Yeast vs. Sora no Kiseki Alternative Saga. Again, I just slaughtered the name, but if you're familiar with the Yeast franchise or the Legends of Heroes franchise, this is a crossover of both those franchises. Then the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, which I'm much more familiar with. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters GX Tag Force 3, 5D's Tag Force 6, which is a game that's had translations available for years, but only recently got cleaned up into a pretty nice version in 2021, as well as Arc V Tag Force Special, which was a game that originally released in Japan in 2015, which if you're not familiar with the Arc Force line of the anime, that's because it's a more recent one. So if you're a fan from back in the day like I am, you may not be familiar with some of the characters there, but regardless, those 3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Titles all have been fan translated. And then moving into some of the Trails games. Nayuti Boundless Trails, which I'll have its proper Japanese name again in the description. It's a Falcom RPG that is a more recent fan translation, but kind of builds off of an older, poor English version that was available. And there are some poor English versions that are available for some of these games just because they use Google Translate to create the translation. And if you've used Google Translate for like your homework or something before, you're probably familiar with the quality of the translation there. It's not always contextually accurate. However, this game has a version coming to the Switch and the PlayStation 4 in 2023, so if you want to hold out to play this, or if you're a real big Trails fan, you can dive in now, as well as this other Trails game, Legends of Heroes Trails to Azure. It's another Falcom RPG that's going to be coming to the Switch in 2023. It'll see a release here stateside. As far as I understand, it's being localized. Sword Art Online Infinity Moment. If you're somebody that's a fan of the Sword Art series, you likely know that the Hollow Fragment game that came out on the Vita this is the game that came before it, and it never made its way west like Hollow Fragment did. And it came out very late in the PSP's lifespan, having released in 2013. Obviously, not as late as that Yu-Gi-Oh! Game we mentioned previously being from 2015, but the English patch for this has not been updated since 2019. However, at the time was 99% complete, so I'd consider this to be very playable. Toukiden Kiwami, probably said that wrong, but this is a game similar to Monster Hunter, but it plays with AI companions. It also received a Vita release, however, I believe that was also not released stateside, but does have a fan translation. Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity. I had the first Phantasy Star Portable game on my PSP. That one was released here in America, but we did not get the second game. It was released in Japan, and as far as I understand, it's a pretty good co-op game to play. Like if you got some friends that have PSPs, or you want to, have a few friends that got Android phones, you want to try this out on PPSSPP, the Android emulator, this is probably one worth taking a look at. Phantasy Star games were always great for that. Then 7th Dragon 2020, which it may seem weird to play an RPG about 2020 now that we're actually past 2020, but this was a franchise that had some success on the DS, later on the PSP, but none of those games came out in America. However, both of them have received fan translations, so if you want to play the first and the second 7th Dragon 2020 game on your PSP, you can do that. And the Dot Hack series is another popular series you may be familiar with from the PlayStation 2 days. And that's an action RPG that had a cult following on the PlayStation 2. And again, continues here. I'm not really sure where this game sits in order. I'm not that familiar with the franchise as a whole. And then moving on to some of the turn-based Gundam games, the tactical RPGs in that series. There's the Super Robot Taisen, a portable Super Robot Taisen Operation Extend, SD Gundam G Generation Overworld, which I was really hoping to play a proper action Gundam game on my Switch, and it turned out that only one of these sort of tactical RPGs were available as far as Gundam games go on the Switch. So if you don't own a Switch, you don't want to check out the one that was released there. There's 3 of them that came out in Japan that have English translations that you can try out. Grand Knight's History. Now that's a tactical RPG that has these beautiful hand-drawn graphics. I don't know much about this game, but looking at the graphics, it might be one you want to check out. And a game with similar sort of artistic graphics is Valkyrie Chronicles 3 Extra Edition. And if you're familiar with the series, we got the second game in the US on PSP. We got the 4th game on PS3. It's just very spotty which games in the Valkyrie Chronicles series we've gotten. And as far as I know, the 3rd game was never re-released in the West officially, so this may be the only way that you can play, at least as far as I know, is through this fan translation. And then one of my favorite games on this entire list, Digimon Adventure, which is an RPG turn-based retelling of the first season of the anime. It really does try to encompass the whole first season of the anime in a very abridged format as it moves through the missions. This was probably the first fan translation that I really played heavily. And there's another Digimon game that was fan translated, Digimon World Redigitized, which if you're familiar with the old PlayStation 1 Digimon games, this one may seem very familiar to you because it's that whole Tamagotchi aspect of it. Not really something that I'm into personally, as I'm into more of like the turn-based play style that came with the adventure game, but this is something you may want to check out if you're a big Digimon fan. Shin Sagami Mushu Multi-Raid 2, and I probably slaughtered that again to a degree, but there are a number of fan-translated Musha games. Think like the Warriors series, Fire Emblem Warriors, Gundam Warriors, just the regular Warriors games that seems like there's 8-9 of. It's this sort of, hack and slash, just mindless sort of destruction type of game where you can kind of shut your mind off or listen to something else and just, blast your way through it. It's about 90% complete. Again, there's a ton of these available as far as the translations go, but I can't really find one that's truly 100% complete, so this is probably your best bet if you're looking to check one out. And then the final set of games, and the reason why I wanted to put this list together, Gundam Assault Survive, Gundam Age Universal Acel, and Gundam vs. Gundam Next Plus are a series of 3 different Gundam games released in Japan that are the proper sort of action Gundam games that I'm into playing lately that were given fan translations. And I honestly think that Gundam vs. Gundam Next Plus is the best one to kind of start yourself out with. as opposed to, say, Gundam Assault Survive, which is a little more than menu translations. But the reality is, even though none of these are truly 100% complete translations for these games, just the fact that you can navigate through the menus is oftentimes good enough in these games that are so, action oriented. And once you understand the controls, you kind of have it down. You don't need to read a lot of text. So those are some of the better, at least more complete fan translation games available on the PSP. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.